This is my progress report presentation on the future of hydrogen-fueled vehicles. Looking first at the purpose of this paper, the purpose is to investigate the current state of hydrogen-fueled vehicles and inform car owners on the potential transition to these vehicles in the near future. And with how heavily cars are relied on for transportation today, drivers will benefit greatly from attaining knowledge on the aspects of this technology that are discussed in this report. And as mentioned in the previous slide, drivers who rely on cars as their primary means of transportation are the intended audience for this report. Some alternative audiences that could benefit from reading through this report would be individuals that work for the Environmental Protection Agency that would be able to allocate funding to these projects, as well as individuals who can either accelerate or slow down the production of these vehicles, such as CEOs and car companies. With that said, though, these individuals, they likely have a much less limited knowledge on the topic with how closely related it is to their professions. So for some background on the topic, it's estimated that cars currently produce 3/4 of the carbon monoxide pollution in the United States, according to the Environmental Protection Agency. This is why hydrogen is such an appealing alternative fuel, as hydrogen fuel cells only produce water and emit no pollutants. And along with the impact on the environment, there are many other benefits in comparison to internal combustion engines as well as electric fueled vehicles. With that said, though, there are concerns with the safety due to hydrogen's flammability and explosive properties, as well as some limitations with the amount of hydrogen and the economics of scaling up the production of these vehicles that are currently being worked through. In looking at some of the pros and cons of this technology, the main pro that was found was obviously the impact on the environment. But along with this, the driving distance per tank of hydrogen was actually found to be comparable to that of a tank of gasoline, which is typically an area of concern with alternative fuels, as electric powered cars do have much more limited ranges. And these vehicles also were found to refuel in just seconds rather than the extensive charging time required for electric cars, which is another pro. And then it was also found that these engines are nearly silent when they're running, although that could be defined as a pro or a con depending on personal preference. And then some of the cons to these vehicles, on the other hand, are the cost of the vehicle as well as its fuel, and then also the lack of refueling stations. But these will continue to be problems through the early stage of development of these vehicles, although they will likely become less intensive issues as production increases and there's more availability of the cars as well as the fuel for them. In looking at the current limitations preventing us from scaling up the production of these vehicles more intensely, first is the amount of hydrogen currently produced. Hydrogen gas is it's not naturally produced in abundance, so we need to develop a process to produce enough hydrogen to keep up with the increase in demand. And the main method used right now is methane reforming, but this method of hydrogen production actually emits carbon dioxide as well, which defeats the purpose of using a clean fuel in the first place. Another method used often is electrolysis or water splitting, which emits less pollutants. However, it still does emit a decent amount. The most promising method currently is biohydrogen production, which is bacteria that is grown and produces hydrogen gas as part of its metabolism. And it also produces nearly zero emissions. On the right-hand side of the display is many of the different types of biohydrogen production that are currently being researched and are trying to be determined which of these methods is most efficient and would be most economically feasible to scale up Uh, and then another limitation is storing and transporting the hydrogen. Gases are difficult to work with as they take up a great amount of volume and are difficult to contain. So a great amount of money would need to be spent on pipelines and storage tanks that would be suitable for this material. And then one last limitation is the cost of developing enough refueling stations for these vehicles. These refueling stations can cost anywhere from $2 to $3 million to develop. So developing enough for them to be convenient for drivers would be a pretty major investment long term. And then the last topic discussed in this report is what has shaped the public opinion on these vehicles so far. One of the major concerns of the public is safety, as there have been some instances, such as the one pictured on the right, in which fires and explosions have occurred with this technology. And one incident in South Korea occurred in which an explosion occurred at one of the refueling stations and sparked protests as individuals no longer felt safe with these vehicles in use. Although there's also another study that was analyzed in this report that actually showed that the potential for explosions was less for hydrogen-fueled vehicles with how well designed the fuel tanks are. However, explosions were also found to cause much greater damage, which is another major concern. Along with this concern, there are also concerns with the convenience and cost associated with these vehicles, as mentioned previously. But again, as this technology is developed further, the public opinion will likely shift in this area. And then for the overall analysis, it is evident that there are many limitations that will need to be overcome before scaling the production up, but we are progressing in the right direction. And in looking at safety incidents, we should use those as a means of learning and improving the safety of this technology rather than being deterred by them, mostly because if widespread use of these vehicles were to be reached, it would greatly cut down on the pollution caused by cars. And is also discussed greatly in the sources that were used in this report that this transition may occur initially with public transport vehicles and then expand further as technology is developed further. And the remaining work for this report is adding in some citations to the findings section and formatting some of the figures and writing the executive summary before finalizing the paper. And these are the references used. Thank you.